Welcome to biology. In this video, we are really going to dive into the most important part of our biochemistry unit, and that's because we are looking at carbon. So carbon is the backbone for all living things. Now this video, I pack as much information as possible into a relatively short amount of time. So you are going to want to pause the video and take good notes because I'm not going to say everything that's on the slides. We just don't have time for that. So make sure you take good notes, make sure you add in the extra bits that I talk about, and realize that the things I talk about on here, or if I actually read something off of the screen, that is something to emphasize to make sure that you really focus in on when you study. So again, carbon is the backbone of life. And most of the compounds found in living things are actually made of carbon. But why is that? Why is carbon making up everything? Well, that's because carbon has 4 valence electrons. So that means it has 4 electrons in the outermost ring. Now remember when we talked about bonding, each one of those valence electrons can be used to form chemical bonds. So since carbon has 4 valence electrons, that means that it can bond to 4 different things, or it can form a total of 4 bonds. Now in chemistry, you'll realize that 4 is the maximum number of bonds that can take place around a single atom. So that's really important. Carbon, when it bonds with other atoms, can form what are called long chains or a backbone. Other atoms are able to attach to that carbon along the backbone. The backbone can be straight or branching. Carbon also can form this ring shape, which is pretty interesting. So those 4 valence electrons, they form branching or straight chains, like I just said. And based off of those combinations, carbon can actually form some incredibly large structures. And these large structures are called macromolecules, and there are 4 groups. We have lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and proteins. So those are 4 main groups of carbon compounds. We'll go through each of them one at a time here. Now remember, macro means big. Molecule is talking about that chemical compound here. So a very, very big chemical, so macromolecule. And these are actually formed by joining together a bunch of smaller molecules. Now, in this video, we're going to use the term monomer quite a bit. And monomer is just that small little foundational unit. In order to make a macromolecule, which is really, really big, you start with monomers, which are the small units. When you join several monomers together, then you get a polymer. And that polymer, if it gets really big, that's what we call our macromolecule. So we'll go through each of the 4, and I really like this chart because it helps to organize your thoughts. You are going to want to draw this into your notes. So carbon compounds is what we're talking about. What are the 4 main carbon compounds? Those are carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Those are the 4 macromolecules that we're talking about. So then what are the monomers that make up each of these macromolecules? Well, carbohydrates, those are made of monosaccharides. Lipids are made up of glycerol and fatty acids. Nucleic acids are made of nucleotides. And proteins are made up of amino acids. So that middle line there, that is the monomers that make up the macromolecule, which is on top. But then what elements actually make up each of those macromolecules? So thinking back to the periodic table of elements, which ones of those are actually used? Well, you're going to notice some trends here. So carbohydrates, they are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. You have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen inside every single carbohydrate. Lipids are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So the exact same elements are used to make lipids as are used to make carbohydrates, but they do totally different things. Now, nucleic acids and proteins, those also have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but both of them also have nitrogen added in. And nucleic acids, they have phosphorus in addition to carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So make a note, there is some pretty straightforward trend happening here. All of our foundational macromolecules, these building blocks of life, they all have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That means that those elements are super duper important in order to be alive. So going through each of these macromolecules one at a time, you're going to want to jot down some notes about the function, about which elements make them up, the monosaccharides, and a few examples of what they are. So the function of carbohydrates is to store energy and to provide some kind of shape or structure for the organism. Carbohydrates make up several types of sugar, so we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides. Saccharide just means sugar, mono means one, di means two, poly means many. But carbohydrates are also some other things as well. Carbohydrates are starches and cellulose. So starches are things like your starchy foods like potatoes and carrots and a lot of other veggies. Cellulose, these are some of those tough fibers in plants that help to give plants support. Lipids are the next macromolecule. The main function of a lipid is to store energy long term. The fact that you have lipids in your body is the reason you are able to go from lunchtime all the way to dinner time without having to eat in between constantly. So this allows your body to turn that food into a stored format and slowly break it down so that way when you get to your next mealtime you are able to still be alive. Lipids also, they form the membranes of cells, and that's really important. Think of the membrane as a skin around the outside. So the membranes help to keep the good stuff in and the bad stuff out, and they also control what enters and leaves. So lipids are super duper important for you to be alive. So the monomer of lipids is glycerol and fatty acids. There's two different monomers that make them up. There are several types of lipids, things like fats, oils, waxes, phospholipids, and steroids. Steroids are important because they help your body to regulate a lot of its normal processes. The next macromolecule is proteins. So proteins make up a lot of your body. If you take a human after they've died and you dehydrate them, so you remove all of the water, you are able to take the dry weight. Now, please don't do this. This is super kind of gross and weird. But if you would weigh that body, half of that weight would actually be proteins. Now remember, the monomer for proteins are amino acids. Proteins do a huge amount of functions within the body. So not only do they form your muscles and help you move around, they also help to control cell signaling and cell growth. So they help your cells communicate with each other. They help your body to control how fast or slow it grows. Proteins also carry the oxygen in your blood, so that way your cells are able to stay alive and to breathe, so to speak. And proteins also help to fight off infection in your body. In fact, proteins make up the antibodies, which provide that defense, so that way your cells are able to fight off anything that might be trying to make them sick. Proteins follow a pretty basic, consistent structure. So you have your carbon in the middle, and on one side you have what's called the amino group. The other side has a carboxyl or an acid group. You have a hydrogen hanging out by itself, and then you have the R group. Now the R group is what changes based off of what the protein's supposed to do. And when you make a protein, or when your body makes a protein, it's this really, really long chain. But that long chain kind of folds in around itself. And based off of the shape that the overall structure takes, that really determines what the protein can or cannot do. The final macromolecule is nucleic acids, and these are made up of nucleotides. The function is to carry that genetic code or your heredity. This is what tells your body what to do and how to do it. There are two types of nucleic acids. You have your DNA and your RNA. Your DNA, that is the main code. That's the blueprints for figuring out what your body does. The RNA just comes in, makes a copy of part of that DNA, leaves the nucleus, goes to the part of the cell, and communicates that original blueprint so that way your body actually does that function that is coded for in the DNA. Now, in summary, and I know this was a huge amount of information that I just flew right through, remember, carbon is that foundation for all living things, and there are 4 groups of macromolecules. You have carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And make sure in your notes for each of those macromolecules, you know what elements form it, what the monomers are that help to build each of those macromolecules, and you know a little bit about the function of what each of those macromolecules really does. Again, make sure to go back and rewatch any sections of this video that might be confusing or you might have missed something on. Let me know what questions that you have, and as you watch this video, I hope that you were able to learn something.